Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Center of Excellence for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultations Conference, Equity from the Start. My name is Catherine Green, and I will be the session facilitator today. And I am joined by Jaylee Jansen, Tawana Jennings, and Michelle Hammock, who will serve, who will be our presenters today. And I am also joined by Malkeisha Knight, who will serve as our technology host. Please note that this session is being recorded, and transcription is available through the Zoom platform. And should you have any questions, please feel free to relay them in the chat. We also want to let you know before we start that the views, policies, and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of SAMHSA or HHS. All right, so that said, I'm going to pass it over to our presenters for today.
Hello, everybody, and good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. We are incredibly excited to be sharing with you today on closing early, equitable implications of factors that impact the longevity of consultation relationships. I'm really excited that we get to share this time with you, and you'll see a little note, a little pitch and reminder that the time spent with us today, if you have endorsement in your area, particularly my team members who are here with us today, excited that this can count towards your either initial application or continued application. So just wanted to promote that and share that. And so now I'm excited that I get to share a little bit of who is joining us, as I appreciate the introduction, Catherine. My name is Michelle Hammock, and I am part of SCIMA's PEAR network, which you'll hear more about that later. I'm the Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Program Specialist. And so while that's my role that I hold as a person in this work, I am a mother. I am actually from the northeastern area, Maryland, and that's where a lot of my equity lens has come from, a lot of work in the Baltimore area. And so that really is meaningful to me. And the meaning also comes as that mama role that I hold. And I have two sweet little, they're not even babies anymore, but my older babies have a biracial identity that they hold, as I identify as white and really hold my Italian ethnicity. Their life is meaningful to me and brings my meaning into this work. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Tawana, to share her.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tawana Jennings, and my current role is an infant and early childhood mental health consultant for the PEAR Network. And my roots are grounded here in South Carolina, East Coast, where I was born and raised in a very large and unique family of multiples, 13 of us, 2 sets of twins, a set of triplets. And I came into this role with those relationships in mind, as I've worked with children for nearly 19 years. So I'm happy to be with you, identify as Black female, and I'm excited that we're getting ready to share a lot of information with you. So I will pass it to Ms. Jaylee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaylee Jansen, and I am coming to you as a researcher and evaluator. I am a white woman. I grew up in the Midwest, but in a very rural area. My dad's a farmer. And so I bring a lot of those experiences along with all of the privilege that I hold to my work here today and my role as an evaluator. As you can see my picture there, I'm also an expecting mother. And so deepening my work and true appreciation for infant and early childhood mental health every day. And you can go to the next slide, Michelle. And just a little bit about what we're going to do today together. We are going to talk about instances in which consultation in South Carolina in the PEAR network are cut short. And then we're going to share some of the predictors and protective factors for those early closures. So some things coming out of the initiative in South Carolina. And then we're really hoping to engage in discussion at the end. I've been in a few of these sessions and they go really quickly, but we're really trying to protect time at the end because this is emerging understanding for us. And we really want to get feedback for how it might apply to your role and your initiatives. Just really quickly, and I'm going to hand it back over to Michelle. I mentioned I am coming from an evaluation background. I am part of Indigo Cultural Center, which was founded in 2007 by Dr. Eva Shivers, who's on the call today. We're BIPOC led and we have 2 divisions. So equity and TA, and then evaluation, which is where I'm coming from. And so you can read a little bit more, visit our website, but we just wanted to do a little shameless plug there for who we are.
And we are incredibly grateful to the Indigo team, as I'm now getting the chance to introduce our consultation program within South Carolina and learn so much from the Indigo team, as well as Center of Excellence, to really shape our model. So let's talk a little bit more about who we are to set the context of the work that you're going to hear a little later. So we are consultants in South Carolina, and our program's PEAR network, Partners for Early Attuned Relationships. And again, we're embedded within SCIMA. We're very fortunate to have the Infant Mental Health Association as part of our work and our foundation. So when you're thinking today about the work that we've done, we are new in this consultation world, at least newer. We officially launched and started taking cases in January of 2021. So that, if you think about that, it's right in the height of COVID, and that might have some interesting implications as you hear about work today. And you'll see we are statewide, and while we began, a lot had to be virtual at the very launch of it. We really hone our work as being in person within that hour kind of distance of each consultant, unless, you can see there's some gaps there. So we still want to provide services to the entire state. And we've been very fortunate and excited to step in all early care and education centers, family, home-based, center-based, court case, Head Starts. We have the opportunity to support public schools, had a little shift in the funding recently. And so that's not currently a part of our service areas. The public schools, we do hope to serve again soon. We are grant-based, as I kind of alluded to, and we have really heard from sites how fortunate they feel that we are able to provide this as a free service. So the accessibility has been really valuable. We've heard from the community members. And so as you peek at all these wonderful faces from our team, we do have 11 consultants, 11 positions available for consultation to be provided. One intern who was very valuable in contributing to our team and learning. I'll also say some of these faces on here, we're fortunate to have bilingual speakers, Spanish, Haitian Creole, and French. And so for the other team members, utilization of interpreters are used. So this is our team. And I want to be able to share a little bit more about what does the model, how does it look in terms of dosage and frequency? How is the service provided? So don't get yourselves overwhelmed with all the details on the slides. It's really just a picture of what does this timeline look like. For our consultants, they hold between 4 and 6 early care and education sites on their cases. We do some additional system level support. So we do, say, baby support, home visitors. That's kind of outside of this immediate scope of what we'll talk about today. But for those sites that they serve, they enter them about 4 to 6 hours per week. I really want to note that we try and be flexible and really individualized to the centers that we're supporting. And so that's why you see this variation of a timeline. Generally, we're thinking about 6 to 18 months for the full implementation from referral to transition period. But when we were doing our evaluation review, we noticed that it could be anywhere from 3 to 21 months that it took folks to get to this transition phase. So I'm going to give you an average about 11 months generally is when we would spend in this timeline. And that does not include the 2 post check-ins of a month and 6 months. Within this time, it ebbs and flows between child and family specific, classroom, and programmatic level consultations, very fluid in that way. And so since we launched about 2.5, 3 years ago, we received over 500 referrals from varying community members, families, professionals, technical assistants, anyone in the community was able to refer. And we're going to talk a little bit in a moment about, what happens when we get stuck in maybe that referral phase. But if you did not make it beyond that referral phase, and we actually serviced 33 sites, made it all the way to the full implementation transition process, to that longer relationship. So one more grounding before we pass and share for more juicy information and patterns that we've observed in the past few years. We want to set the context, have some common language based on what we're sharing today. And these are just definitions of how we see how consultation was cut short. So when we are talking about early closures, we're talking about the closures of an entire early care and education site. At any time a case closed before the expected or desired dosage, right, that full implementation phase going to transition, that meant we were ending early. We're no longer servicing any part of that consultation, programmatic, classroom, or family. We really did try hard if there was a closure of a site, particularly abruptly, to support linkages for the families. But again, that integrated site meant we closed altogether for that consultation. And then thinking about the transition and turnovers that occurred within centers. We typically experience this ending of a relationship when a child or teacher leave the classroom or center as a whole. We saw, I can't imagine, I can't wait to hear voices later about the staff turnover that was experienced in the past few years were in great numbers. And so that was a part of the early ending consultation early. And so there were times we also noticed that there were children leaving the site. They had either this progression into another class or abruptly. And so sometimes there are these preemptive transitions that occurred, and that meant there was an end in our dyadic relationship. Then we want to think on, there were disruptions at times. There were disruptions when the mental health consultant didn't necessarily end, consultation was still present, but there was a disruption, a break in consultation. Again, COVID may be a part of it, or structural needs of the center that we are referring to. And finally, a big piece of what we're going to lean into today is this word attrition. And it's really a research term and how we think about the evaluation data of when any of these reasons that we named above, early closures, transitions, turnover, that consultation, relationship end, and we're not able to obtain that continued evaluation data anytime that we didn't make it to that transition phase. And so these are the framework, the terms that we'll be leaning into today. And so we want to think for just one moment, it's like, so why is this important? I want to pause to elevate that consultation, closing early, what are some of the problems and what are some of the consequences of being cut short? And I'm sure as you look at the screen, look at some of these terms that you probably can relate to how this is shown up in your work. There are implications, not only for the adult, like you can see on the screen, maybe that's a center director or a parent and what they feel in the midst of how we support them. But we know this trickles down to the babies. And over the past few years and all the challenges in this early care and education setting, that it's big feelings for the adults, big feelings for the kiddos. We know that there's behaviors that are showing up, and consultation is a part of buffering for those, right? We're a part of stepping in and being that alongside of them and supporting them. And so when we start to think of, we mentioned turnovers just a few moments ago, that there was great turnovers. And then we think about what happens, what's that trickle effect? Well, when there's turnover staff and they leave, there's more ratios that they're holding in their classroom of kiddos, more stress that they're feeling, the burnout's more likely. And we are a part of those advocates for self-care and slowing them down and having those reflective moments alongside of them. And so when consultation ends, that advocacy, that buffer is no longer there. And we can also think about the changes in relationships, sometimes abrupt changes, and can be activating for some of the most vulnerable populations that we serve. We want to be a part of the resilience and that building and that buffering against the impacts of trauma, and not another kind of unstable relationship or some shifting in their environment. And that can have that trickle effect to the kiddos and some of the, as we mentioned, the behaviors, or even some of the long-term risks of expulsion suspensions. We want to be a part of that preventative work. So we know that this is really important for us to lean into, why are cases closing early? What's going on with the being cut short? So I'm going to pass it to Ms. Jaylee, who is going to share a little bit more about what we've seen.
So yes, so we started wandering together as evaluators and with the PEAR network for what might be contributing to when these cases get cut short. Is there anything we can learn from the data we've collected together to help us understand kind of this phenomenon that's happening? So you can go to the next slide. So what we did first was just try to understand what's the context? Where are we at? And so out of 97 different cases, 73% closed early, which means that they were cut short before they reached that transition phase, that full experience of consultation. So then we started digging in a little more. Well, what stage did folks get to? we see that 50% of cases didn't make it out of the referral phase, right? They never even really engaged in partnership with the PEAR network. And then we see some folks dropped off at initiation, exploration, plan development, plan implementation, and that about 25% of the cases in South Carolina are reaching that transition phase. And so what we did next was start exploring predictors of, well, what does contribute to either closing early or staying in consultation? And so the first one we looked at was referral source. So when a consultation referral comes from a director, teacher, provider at a site or program, that's a protective factor for continuing consultation. That means that they stay in consultation longer. Interestingly, when the referral comes from a parent, that predicted or contributed to consultation ending early. And so I did not get our poll set up. I apologize. So instead, I'd love you to just react in the chat if your initiative does allow parents to submit referrals, because we're finding this might be a unique thing in South Carolina, or you can react to my second chat if it does not allow. So you can go to the next slide here, Michelle. We're going to get into some more nuanced numbers here. So when we looked at parent-led referrals, a referral coming from a parent was 239% more likely to stay in the referral stage when compared to a referral coming from a teacher or director. So we really see referrals coming from parents, they're not reaching it to any stages of consultation. When we looked at it the opposite way, well, how many parent referrals are reaching transition, that full consultation? A referral coming from a parent was 50% less likely to reach that full stage of consultation. So we're going to go to the next slide, and Tawana is going to add some context to this, help us kind of wrap our heads around the data in ways that are relevant to practice specifically.
Thank you, Jaylee. So we want to talk about how does the referral source show up in practice? And so the takeaway here kind of notes that there are noticeable patterns for which some of these referrals don't even make it past that referral phase. So in other words, these cases are staying stagnant after that initial outreach from the parents. And so why aren't the parents making out of that referral? So we first have that parent urgency, and hopelessness increases that likelihood of referring. And so we notice that there's a high influx of parents that are reaching out for these children that have these really big behaviors, which is often due to these parents that are feeling frantic. They're feeling hopeless for some sort of resolution for their child, because now they're at risk for expulsion. And a lot of parents are really desperate. They need to keep their child in daycare because expulsion not only affects the child, but it also impacts that family's daily living. And so parents could make these decisions to switch centers because they can't keep calling or keep having calls from their center to pick their child up from daycare, or having to leave work early. And so there is that desperate need and urgency for any kind of help. And so the parents often will buy into our program. And then you have that director's buy-in, their readiness, their capacity, which does impacts the sustainability of consultation. And so some directors, if we just look at it plain, just don't want to get on board with consultation. And perhaps that may have some sort of stigma to mental health or infant early childhood consultation. But we want to wonder why. So we wonder, what about our receptiveness of our model in relation to the stigmas of mental health, which can include that reflective practice of us slowing down and wondering and supporting that caregiver that doesn't have a directive approach to their answers. So then we have some of the directors that are just flat out tapped out. They have lack of capacity. So even if there is a desire to receive support, some of the directors just may not have the capacity to engage because they are often in this crisis and survival mode. They're lacking staff and leadership, and they're just overwhelmed. And so parents may refer, but there isn't that readiness or that motivation of the leadership. And so therefore there's this lack in follow through from that leadership to move even from that referral to that initiation stage. We also find that sometimes closures happen very shortly after referral because the centers then expel a child. And so they don't understand or realize or even identify that that larger system support is available. And so when that problem is gone, the service isn't really needed. And so here's the buy-in. We understand mental health consultation is slow. It is steady. It requires months to build capacity, to build those relationships, that commitment of the staff to work alongside a consultant, not to expel a child. And so we're shifting from the perspective of the behavior change is slow. And we're moving from reactive and emotional to this logical understanding of what a child is trying to communicate. And so we have this importance of the equitable access. So equity is the process of involving those that are most impacted, right? And so we have many parents that make referrals, but no matter how much they're buy-in to our program and how much they want the services from us, they're still unable to initiate those services in the center themselves. And so we want to think about that equity or really the lack of, especially in some states that don't let parents make referrals. And so we also just want to think about how do we maintain this equitable access and ensure that directors are onboarding with our services.
We're going to have time to discuss at the end, but if you have like initial thoughts or reactions, feel free to put them in the chat for us. So our second element of predicting to early closure was language in the site. And language operated uniquely. So it's not as straightforward as our parent referrals before. So for the director, for the leader of the site, the more diversity in language spoken by the children at the site meant that the director was more likely to continue to maintain the consultation relationship. Conversely, for teachers and children, the more diverse language is spoken actually contributed to consultation ending early. So you can go to the next slide, Michelle. So we have our percentages here again for you. So you can see kind of in that higher level, yellow's happy, that means good. So when sites had more children who spoke a language other than English, they were 40% more likely to stay in consultation to continue the relationship. Similarly, specifically when more children in their site spoke Spanish, they were almost 50% more likely to stay in consultation. So we see it being a really nice protective factor for continuing consultation. When we look over to teachers' report, when teachers were in sites, and this is an important distinction, they're in sites that have children who speak languages other than English and other than Spanish, they were 126% more likely to end early. That same trend is seen when there are more children in their specific classrooms that speak a language other than English. They're 30% more likely to end early. And then when we look at our children, our focused children, we see that when those children are in classrooms with more children who speak a language other than English, they are also more likely to leave the consultation relationship early. So it could be transitioning out of the center, could be moving classrooms, etc. So we have a lot of discussion points here, but I'm just going to pause again and summarize that for directors, more diverse languages, specifically Spanish, seem to be a reason to stay in consultation or a contextual factor that contributes to staying. Whereas language in the classroom for the teacher and the child can often be a barrier to continuing consultation. So Tawana, take it away for us. Tell us what this feels like in practice.
So language does show up significantly. So we found that the types of sites, like we said, that have that more diversity may want or need the support of the consultant. And so directors at sites with children that spoke languages other than English were more likely to stay with the consultation, and they have more of that buy-in because that program needs that extra support for those language barriers. And so this is particularly important and interesting to South Carolina because the languages are such a growing edge. And so we also note that consultation with teachers and families is challenging when there is a language barrier. And so we want to know, how do you communicate with children who do not speak the same language as you? How do you understand their wants, their needs, their emotions? And personally, I found in my centers, with more language diversity, they want and need the help. And therefore, they're often way more engaged in our services because there is that language barrier that they need assistance with. Often types of sites that have these different or multiple languages are a little bit more unique. And so, for instance, the private sites or the smaller sites, they may want or be more inclined to pursue a free service or additional resources, even or those free screenings for the center for that cost effectiveness of the center. And so I also noticed that the children who spoke a language other than English or Spanish were more likely to have multiple transition of teachers in the center, but not necessarily leaving the center. So in other words, those teachers are moving around constantly in different classrooms that have those different language barriers. And so just to give you an idea of one, I'll just a quick story for one of my kids that 3-year-old spoke Russian, no English. The teachers had extreme difficulty working with this child. And his behaviors just kept increasing. And so we got the referral. We're able to keep moving forward with it. He moved around in different classrooms because these teachers were thinking, well, maybe this environment might help him better. Maybe this teacher may help better work with him. And really and truly, it really just exasperated his behaviors. And so doing consultation in this instance was very challenging because I don't speak Russian as well. And so the teacher would often say things like, I don't even know how to communicate the support for this child when I don't know what he is saying or what he is needing. And so we did a lot of reflecting with this teacher, with their parent, with the director. And this parent was amazing. She was bilingual. And so she was able to sit in and agree to sit in the classroom with this child for a day, just to kind of help him feel a little more safe in the classroom, understand with that teacher what his needs were and what he was relaying to the teacher. And so he felt a little more safe. The unique thing about this family is that this child had already experienced so much trauma from Russia, were in isolation camps during the COVID, had poor care, little food, also had some trauma from a previous center that they were in. So this new environment, which just was an additional stressor for this child, and on top of that language issue. And so eventually, used everything from physical communication to gestures of showing him things, using translation apps. And he began to get comfortable. He ended up moving, long story shorter, was he ended up moving. And I was still able to transition with this family of resources in another state that she was in, and still working with that center. And so we find that language is definitely a huge barrier. And so with that language barrier for teachers, we also noticed that this did not show up in our Spanish speaking classrooms. Interestingly enough, the teachers at these sites with more language other than English were likely to end. And so the trend wasn't for the Spanish speaking. And so this may contribute to the fact that these centers seem to be more tight-knit. They're like a family. They're close. They stick together. And so more frequently, they're sticking together in their centers without leaving the sites. And so I also noticed, and these are just in my personal experiences, that these Spanish-speaking families and culture, they find resources with their teachers, their assistants, and within their own community to keep that family-like environment. And I had a Latino director that would say, the more the merrier. We like having our families together. And so that just goes to show some of that language that they want to stick together. They stay close knit. And so there are some curiosities about these impacts of consultants who speak a different language other than their childcare staff, and that receptiveness to welcome outside resources in from another culture.
As we previewed before, turnover, right? Lots of turnover happened during COVID, post-COVID, as the ECE system continues to kind of grapple with the effects of COVID and also other systemic issues. And so, again, we see kind of mixed findings, but these make a bit more sense. They're easier to comprehend, I guess. So turnover at the site, so more teachers, more staff turning over. meant that directors were more likely to keep their sites with the consultant to maintain consultation at the site. But for teachers, who are typically the ones that are turning over, right, it was more likely for their consultation relationships to be ending early. So what this kind of predicts, or what this means, is that consultation staying at the site, but those unique teachers are heading out or they're transitioning away. Go ahead, Michelle. So here's our lovely percentages, and you can see that these aren't quite as intense as our previous ones, right? We don't have 129% here, but we do see that when there's more turnover at a site, directors are 17% more likely to stay with their consultation relationship, whereas teachers are 19, almost 20% more likely to end consultation early before reaching that transition phase.
Okay, so how does turnover show up? The impacts of COVID, as we know, is still being felt in centers and increasing that staff turnover. So turnovers equal ended consultation. And so from a system perspective, when we think about COVID, the illness and lack of, it increases the likelihood of staff leaving a center or even leaving their early childhood work in its entirety. And so we recognize that PEAR, we started amidst COVID, which pretty much amplified the equity issues that we're having, these high turnovers and high classroom ratios. And so we have these few that you see up here. Directors at sites with high turnover value the additional support of teachers. So those sites that have these turnover rates, they welcome more consultants coming in and helping because they know that there is a high ratio for turnovers with teachers. And so getting that extra guidance and observation in the classroom is important. However, it does point to how unstable and unsteady the system is in itself. And so we have teachers' overall well-being being challenged and less likely to stay at sites or in the same classroom. And so teachers are not really staying in their sites when there is this high turnover. You're often seeing them moving around often. We think about the implications of how they're feeling, that burnout, that compassion fatigue, overworked and being frustrated. And so ultimately, they're even, feeling obligated to be there, even with their physical and mental needs being unmet. And so ultimately the impacts are more challenging in the relationships. The more staff turnover means that they have to start new relationships. So we have to wonder about the lack of trust and reliability in our systems. As we know, it's very challenging to build those relationships with a consultant where there is trust in the administrative staff. So if there's no stability, it's less likely that they will engage in that consultation from the leadership.
Sorry, I'm talking and I'm on mute. We have about 20 minutes till the end of session, and we really want to leave time for discussion. And so this is the last predictor we're going to share. I think we had one additional after this, but that's okay. Michelle and Tawana, do you want to do site size, or would you like to do child behaviors and emotions? Oh, Michelle, you're on mute. Let's do child. Oh, go ahead, Tawana.
I'm okay with doing either one, Jaylee.
Okay, let's skip over to child behaviors. So in brief, site size contributed to both teachers and directors ending early. The bigger the site, the harder it was to keep consultation. Child behaviors and emotions, right? We think about the kiddos. So for teachers, having a child that had a pro-social problem, so they have kind of higher risk on their pro-social behaviors, it was a protective factor to continue consultation. So when the child was exhibiting pro-social challenges with peers and friends in the classroom, the teachers maintained engagement in consultation for longer. However, when children had conduct problems, big behavior problems, in those cases, teachers actually ended consultation earlier. So we can go to our percentages here. The next slide. So we can see our lovely percentages one last time. When a focus child, a referral child, had higher peer problems, the teacher was 32% more likely to stay engaged in their consultation relationship. When the child had, I'm skipping to the final column there, when the focus child had higher conduct problems, they were 35% more likely to end consultation early. That middle graph there is just showing kind of the inverse of peer problems. So as a child maybe gained more prosociality, then that actually contributed to the teacher ending early. And so we can start to wonder, what about peer problems makes the teacher engage in consultation more or need it more? Or what about conduct problems makes engaging in consultation particularly challenging? And Tawana is going to guide us through her experiences with that.
So with the conduct problems that I've seen in my centers, they typically cause those children to leave the centers ultimately, or ending consultation. And so it's usually to the severity of that particular conduct issue. And so let's talk about that. For instance, the child runs out of the building, refusing to remain safe inside, jumping off, furniture, hitting their other kids, biting, where that's an infection control issue. And then those are just to name a few things. And I'm sure there's some of you that can kind of, understand some of those kids that we deal with that really have those big behaviors and those unsafe behaviors where the director ends up feeling like their hands are tied. And so this feeling that they say, I want to help, I want, to do what I can, but I feel like my hands are tied when it comes to these issues that they cannot, and they have no control over. And so even though they don't want to expel the child, they know that these behaviors are continual. Then you have those children that sometimes if they're inflicting another pain on another child and they're telling their parents, and the parents are saying, hey, what are you doing about hurting my kid? What's happening? And rightly so, those parents want to know what is happening with that behavior. And so then you have that additional stress of the parents calling and wanting them to do something right away. And so then you have something that I hear one too many times is, it's my teacher or my student, and I can't afford to lose another teacher. Right.
Thank you, Tawana. And so we see a lot of factors kind of presenting in unique ways here for protective factors, for keeping that consultation relationship going, or as barriers to continuing. And so I think we want to head right into discussion. And I know the chat's been pretty active, which is so exciting. So please share with us your thoughts, what's resonating, what's also maybe not resonating. We'd love to know what's different. And we have some guiding prompts here on the screen, but we're happy to just engage in what's coming up for you. And we can also go back to slides if you'd like to revisit. And I'm just reading the chat. Participants are muted. So I think you do have to raise your hand so that we can get you to come off mute. So we can even start with this first prompt of, for you as a consultant or in your initiative, how frequently do you experience an early closure or disruption? Is that something that's impacting your initiative, or is that something that maybe is experienced uniquely here in South Carolina?
Jaylee, I do see in the chat, thank you, Dana. We often see closures because a child is soft expelled, and I appreciate you adding in, there's so many different levels, right? Even just having common language of what is suspension, what is expulsion. That is some work being done in South Carolina. I'd love to hear how it's going in other states. And says the school doesn't call that, but that's the reality. Absolutely. And that absolutely poses challenges when we're, trying to support in consultation and there's that abrupt leaving. Others have examples. Oh, yes. Okay. You heard us use the word urgency. And as Laura says, we are often a last ditch effort. And by the time they call us, their mind is pretty much already made up to expel. It's exactly, I'm thinking when Tawana shared earlier of like the parents, right? They're calling this urgency. There's this felt sense of our kiddo might get expelled or whatever other term might be used. Another appropriate environment is where they're sharing their child might go. And then for us, we're getting there and the next step is naturally happening where they're like, well, we called consultation. And then the service ends up not being able to fully support that child, but we do hope to support other kiddos in the center. And sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't.
I see Heidi brought up a really important point here. As a consultation supervisor, she works as hard as she can to prep the site to receive consultation. So if there is that chance where the child's expelled, they try to continue to form the relationship with the site. I'm really curious about what kind of things Heidi, you do or others do to kind of prepare or ready the site. That's something we're talking about a lot here at Indigo. And how do you try to get the site to maintain consultation when they think, oh, our problem has been solved, when we know there's so many other capacities that could be built?
Can I come off mute? I forgot what you said about mute.
Yes, we love to hear voices.
Yeah, I meet with all the new referrals, both parent and the site. But it is demoralizing when you do a lot of that upfront work and you still have the site kind of where it feels like they've tried to check the box of connecting with us. But I do really believe our funder here in Colorado requires us to ask about expulsion in the beginning. And I do think that at least puts it out as a topic to discuss. And we do talk with the site about utilizing us for a certain amount of time and try to prep them for like what the process is, what we're going to ask them for. And try to have actually directors prep their staff and ask their staff about their interest in meeting with a consultant, having us come in the room, kind of just those things to hopefully prep people for working with us and not catching them off guard with asks. But it is hard. This is a hard time of year too, I think, because there's a lot of that.
Thank you. That was really, meaningful to hear that there's connecting themes across. And I appreciate a lot of the prep, which I'm looking at my co-manager and how much do we prep? How much do we see in our process, particularly with the wait list, which we didn't talk much about today. If you all have a wait list, what does that look like in that preparation stage? Juan, I saw you unmute a few minutes ago, so I didn't know if you want to share or do we keep on looking at the chat?
I'm hearing and listening to everyone, and I love that there's a lot of things that I would love to have mentioned and just couldn't get to them. But one of those major things I was thinking about was the checkbox that I heard. And oftentimes when we do get these referrals and they're almost at that end, we're going to expel them. We just need to make sure we have a behavior plan in place. We've checked off of all these particular resources. And so sometimes as consultants, we come in as, oh, we just wanted to make sure we added you to our behavior plan. And it gives that center, that validation in a sense to go ahead and expel the kid. And so we come in with their minds already made up sometimes. And so when I heard that, I was like, gosh, it's just interesting to hear that it is not just in South Carolina here, it's everywhere. So.
And it seems like there's some similar thing Dana shared that it's kind of that co-signing with them. And I appreciate that others are saying like, we hope to continue the relationship, right? It's not just that's it, that we're done. We want to change systems and be a part of that and continue just relationship building. If it's planting a seed and a continued conversation for later, we do welcome that. And we do see continued referrals come in from other community members and sites that keep popping up. So we hope at some point we can continue and support them. I also am seeing from Susan, says about 20% of the cases consider early closure is typically because of the system I'm entering is struggling. I would love to hear more about what that kind of that experience is of the system struggling that you've seen in Illinois, and you continue that readiness conversation. I don't know if you want to say more about that, Susan.
Sure. Hi. I think just generally, I mean, everything you all talked about today was very interesting and aligns a lot with what, I've experienced personally. In Illinois, I work in the suburban area of Chicago, and I feel there are systems. I mean, I've been a consultant for about 8 years, and over that time, there's just this sense of, if I enter a new site, there's a sense of there's just systemic challenges, meaning so much turnover, lots of, administrative turnover, lack of administrative support for staff, and things that are entering as a consultant are very hard. And of course, they're calling me, or I'm sure many of you as consultants, for a specific child. Yet you're entering and realizing, well, there's so many things happening here that are not supportive of, this educator even being able to support this child, even if, he or she has the best of intentions and wants to. Just systemically, it's not most likely not going to happen. And I feel like those are that's what I noticed to be my sites that probably, in my opinion, would end early, just because even again with individuals in that system who are so well intentioned, it's just operating wise, it's just so difficult for them to do. And I was mentioning in, some of my other comments is that we've had conversations for years back and forth about this idea of readiness. There are parts of our state that require readiness for consultation. And, our group kind of goes back and forth about what that means, and what's our role when we're entering a site that doesn't feel ready. And does our role shift in that instance? Meaning we're there to get them ready, and how does that look different than if they are ready? So we've just had those conversations for years and years, and we've never really come to an endpoint.
I love that you said the shifting of what the approach is, because we do have a tool we use, a set of questions that are guiding, which are either our own thought process or how we're engaging with the leadership of a center. And we color coded at one point, and our team was like, no, we can't make it red, yellow, and green, yellow, and red, because we're not stopping, right? It's just shifting our approach. It's helping us to re-envision how we're going to support them. And it makes it challenging sometimes for consultants to get past that referral stage when there are so many of those system barriers that you were mentioning. Jaylee and Tawana, as I'm hoping you're helping me engage, were there any other points in the chat that you wanted to bring up?
We just do see folks resonating with the findings around language for Spanish speaking sites, or the absence of findings for Spanish speaking sites, right? We saw that the director maintained relationships when they were predominantly Spanish speaking, and that having Spanish speaking children was not a negative predictor for teachers. And Sarah and Susan said, yes, we agree. Like when we go into a Spanish speaking site or a predominantly like Spanish Latin culture, we find that those sites really do maintain consultation for a longer period of time. And so it's operating differently than languages other than English and Spanish. Is really interesting. And then lots of chat about readiness, which I just love thinking about and considering. We had one chat that said, Stacy mentioned that they're actually going to, they're working to implement that when you sign on, it's 3 months before of ECE before expulsion of the child. And so kind of agreeing to this timeline for consultation to work its magic. It's being reviewed, so not in place yet, but Stacy, keep in touch. We'd love to hear how that goes. And then Deborah, yes, thank you.
So I'm also in Illinois, and I'm in that other part of the state that Susan referred to. And we do have a measure for readiness. We find that a lot of times sites are not ready for a variety of reasons, and some of which, for as much as they may need our services, may have other issues that impede that process and act to create some level of barrier of them being able to fully be engaged in consultation. And so sometimes what we're finding with those particular centers is that they need other services, such as we have a quality system called Accelerate, and they need those services that come through that state system to help them to get more organized as a business. They may have business practices that are impacting how their staff and their turnover, as well as a variety of other issues. And so what our consultants do is that we do have what we call readiness indicators. And so we have found that by using readiness indicators, it helps us to have a better handle on how do we want to approach the consultation. And when we realize sites are not ready, we don't kick them to the curb. Certainly, we say to that provider, we definitely want to connect with you, and we give them a time frame.
Thank you.
And we come back in that time frame.
Thank you. And I love the hearty conversation. And I know we are at time and we're getting that prompted to the next one. So thank you for the fruitful conversation and hearing a little bit. And please share with us if there are additional things that are coming to mind or things you want to share to help us in our journey.
And any resources, we'd love to have them.
Thank you so much, Jaylee, Tawana, and Michelle for this wonderful presentation and for all the participants for your engagement as well. And we hope that you learned something today and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, everyone.